Have you ever sat in an empty car of the subway, the underground, or the U-Bahn, and thought, it sure would be awful if all the lights shut off right now? My name is Heather Byram, and End of the Line was born from this exact creepy thought. Taking inspiration from stories like King's Langoliers or Gaiman's Neverwhere, players will be transported to an alternate world, or as I like to call it, the underground of the underground, where ghosts wait for them in the darkness. End of the Line is a 3D first-person non-combat terror adventure game for those horror lovers that are tired of jump scares. It has an ESRB rating of T, and the demographic is 13 to 45, though horror is for everybody over the age of 13. Initially, the player will avoid being caught in the dark as much as possible to save themselves from succumbing to the souls trapped within, though in time the player will learn to embrace death as an old friend. While navigating dark trains and tunnels, the player will spend their time looking for items that will help keep them out of the dark. Most importantly, they will turn on train lines that will allow them to activate emergency beacons. These beacons will act as respawn points when the player is inevitably consumed by the darkness. Beacons allow the player to use death as a type of fast travel within the underground subway via succumbing to the darkness. If the player's beacon is destroyed, or they neglected to place one, they will respawn back at the geometry train at the start of the map. Beacons can only be activated on the stops where the player has turned on the power to the train line. Turning on the power does not mean the lights are on, but the train is available to use to get from stop to stop. But certain types of ghosts reside in all the different types of the areas of the subway, and the player is only safe in the geometry train. Turning on all of the train line's power allows the player to turn on the longest line, the Mobius line. Once this line is finally activated, the player can ride the train at full speed to the end of the line and make it out of the darkness, or the other side of the Mobius line. While the game is non-combat, the player will use light as a defense. Of the three types of ghosts, shadows and creepers will stay away from your cone of light, so it's best to keep stocked up on loose phones, lighters, and matches you find in the train cars and control rooms. In most horror games, over time the player becomes desensitized to the monsters that constantly assail them. Keeping the scares fresh is something difficult to do correctly without cutting the game short or introducing new scares. End of the Line has the players intentionally running into the darkness if it means they can skip stretches of subway they've been to already, if they've activated those beacons. In turn, they will naturally lose their fear of the ghosts within the darkness and begin to notice the storyline. As soon as the player enters the darkness, there will be markings and notations on the walls. Within the geometry train, there are notes and sketches lining the surfaces. These are from the three ghosts that have found themselves stuck here before you. They left you clues if you choose to follow them, but as you will work out, none of them made it out safely and have ultimately given in to the infinite dark. While the theme is monsters and ghosts, the mood will shift from terror to sadness. The player will grow a connection to the people leaving notes behind, only to discover their fate was to lurk in these underground passages forever. For the main menu and initial tutorial, I want it to resemble any kind of realistic modern digital game one could find on Steam. From launch, the player is presented with gameplay. They are loaded in front of the turnstiles leading into the subway and can choose to insert a ticket or press the emergency button that will take them out of the game. If they insert their ticket, then they can walk past the turnstiles and into the station for the Mobius line. If they've never played before, there will only be one train that the player can board, which prompts a new game. If they have played and have a saved game, they can go to the geometry train and continue with their progress. Before boarding the train, the player will have all actions available to them to practice as a tutorial. The pause menu is located within the player's phone, but does not act as a genuine pause. While navigating the settings, the player can turn the phone light on via the phone lock screens to stay within the light. Again, the player is only safe from the darkness while inside of the geometry train, but keeping their back against a wall with their phone light on will also do the trick. During this time, the battery will not deplete like it normally would using the light. Within the pause menu, the player can fine-tune the audio, adjust the overall difficulty, aka the brightness, given out by all light items, and view the controls. The brightness slider will control how bright each of your sources of light are in gameplay. High brightness will cover a broader space. Low brightness will just about illuminate the space your character takes up. This will be able to be changed during gameplay as it doesn't change the enemy's difficulty, just the player's overall light coverage. While in the darkness, the heads-up display will show any items the player has in reserve on the top left. The player will be able to hold 2 phones, 1 flashlight, 2 packs of matches, 12 matches each, and 2 lighters. These items are stored on the player's person, so within pockets on clothing, so the player won't be able to hold a ton of stuff at once. The player will start with one phone and a charger. The charger will be usable within the geometry train and the control stations that have been activated, but be careful when waiting on a phone to charge in a control station. The player will use the mouse scroll wheel to cycle through the available items. When an item is available, the icon in the top left will be white. If not available, so if the player does not have the item or if the phone is dead, the icon in the top left will then be gray. The amount of each, where applicable, will present via subscript next to the icon. When lines are activated, the player will see the line in the top right, eventually illuminating all 10 lines. The player will be able to walk, run, activate the beacons, activate or turn on the line power, search, use their light, put away their light, open doors, view points of interest, pick up items, bring out their phone, put away their phone, and jump. The line power, or third rail power, will need to be activated so the player can ride that train or access that line. This will also turn on the lights within the tunnels that have working lights. These activation points are located within control stations at the end caps of the lines. But you might find a control station that doesn't work, so you might have to go to the end of that line. Once that line is active, the player must be careful when walking on the tracks, as there is now a chance of electrocution, and this will send the player back to the respawn point. The emergency beacons will resemble the typical emergency beacon you're likely to find on a college campus. When activated, a blue light will appear, and this will also act as a protection from the ghosts. The player can only activate one beacon at a time, and only within lines that are activated. Once a line is activated, any beacon on any stop within the line is available to use. These beacons will act as respawn points, so the player should use these strategically as a sort of fast travel around this underground railway. Objects include phones, matches, lighters, emergency beacons, line power switches, trains, train cars, geometry train, the shadow ghost, the creeper ghost, and the large and imposing guardian ghost. Along the underground walkways, there will be the typical directional signs informing the player of their current location and surrounding routes. To pick up an item or activate a beacon or power line, the player will press E when prompted. Again, to select an item from the inventory, the player will use the mouse scroll wheel. To use a light source, the player will click the left mouse button, another click will put away or put out the light source. The geometry train will be the only safe haven, as well as the only place to have power from the start. It will be within sight when the player enters the darkness originally, so there is minimal chance of missing it. Within the geometry train, the player can see the whole map laid out, not just the lines they've activated. They will be able to see where the active beacon is, and also will be able to charge a phone while they're out exploring. When approached by ghosts, the player can use their light to deter the ghosts and keep them at minimum just outside of the perimeter of their lights. This will keep ghosts away until the light goes out. The shadow and the creeper will try to skirt around the light to find a dark spot around the player. The guardian will not. If the light goes out, or the player runs into the creeper or the shadow while already in the dark, then they have a chance to run for it. If they make it to a light source before the ghost catches up to them, then they will not be respawned. The creeper is a fleeting ghost. It will not stick around long if the player is in a light source. The shadow will stalk the player a bit longer, but will also leave. The guardian is a patient ghost and will wait forever if it has to. The guardian is also the only ghost that will stay within the light provided by the player, so not environment light, but will not move once illuminated. The shadow is about the same speed as the player, the creeper is faster, and the guardian is very slow. The creeper resembles a popular creepypasta creature called the Rake, humanoid in appearance but crawls on hands and knees, or feet. It can walk upside down, meaning the joints on its limbs can bend both ways depending on how the creeper prefers to be crawling. It can walk on all surfaces, floor, walls, and ceilings. You're most likely to find the creeper in corridors or on a train car and train tunnels. The shadow is represented as a silhouette with eyes, just lurking outside of the player's field of view until it's too close for comfort. The shadow will sometimes move in tandem with the player when nearby, but is usually seen as walking past corridors or moving out of frame just when you thought it was the shadow of something else. The shadow is everywhere, but it's quite fond of rooms, like the control room. The guardian is the height of the platform room. References are close to Pyramid Head from Silent Hill and the Hammer from 13 Ghosts. The player will encounter the guardian within platforms only. There is only one of each ghost, so the player will never be bombarded and overwhelmed. Though they can be attacked by more than one ghost, this is less likely as they have their own preferred areas, though. The design of the level and games as a whole will closely resemble any modern subway you could take today. I want the player to think of the creeper on their next commute because their scariest moment was encountering one alone in a train car. I have a full living train design document that I will link below, but a summation of this is that there will be 2 train lengths, the long and short trains. Long trains are 7 cars long, short trains are 3 cars long. The geometry train is 1 car long. There are 10 lines. Mobius, which is the main line the player is working from, and this wraps around the whole map in a backwards C. Cardimax, Gemini, New Joanna, Oxbow, Bath, House of Fawns, Silver Wedding, Forum, and Decimax. The overall layout is roughly inspired by the layout of the ancient city of Pompeii. No particular reason outside of my own interests. The current government signs within the London Underground were created by artists Ali Auger and La Boca Limited. Seeing these on my most recent trip to London in February re-sparked my interest in this game idea. Originally crafted in 2017 while riding trains on the U-Bahn, the block and gradient style of these posters made me feel a little uneasy despite their guidance. Ideally, I want the art style of the tutorial to be a juxtaposition to the darkness, which will look more like Superhot and blocks of color and gradients like these signs. The overall game's color will be red, black, and white, but there will be varying shades of blue to give the player some light and hope. The game will be made using Unity 3D engine, while the interactive objects will be made in Blender. Otherwise, the larger objects and general layout will be made using ProBuilder within Unity. Sounds will include train noises recorded from the source, the London Underground. Background chatter will also come from publicly recording. There will be lonely white music that will play while the player is alone in the darkness. Each ghost will have its own synesthetically red music, and these will be provided by a video game musician named Adam Beck. The creeper will have accompanying clicking sounds. Is it the sound of its feet moving or just the sound it makes? You really don't want to stick around to find out. When it moves, the shadow will sound like wind blowing over open bottles. The Guardian's steps will be loud and feel like they shake the room. The phone's UI will have a button click sound. Upon release, users will find it available on Steam. Thank you for your time, and I hope we can make it out of the darkness together.